Word problems can be a problem. I'm sure you will agree with me on this based on your high school experience. And as we start dealing with word problems directly through the first type of word problems that we shall encounter, namely related rates problems, I want to give you some tips about problem solving in general. Actually, the expression problem solving is not quite right because problem solving refers in general to solving problems which may or may not have a solution, which may have different kinds of solutions and so on, which are a little bit require a little bit more imagination or creativity and so on. Word problems require mostly organization. In word problems, we're required just to organize our information and use some particular techniques that we have studied in the course to solve the problem. Okay, so it's a special kind of problems. In a way, they are easier because there is always a basic technique that will provide us the solution. On the other hand, because of that, they can be a little bit more boring. Problem solving in general is more exciting, but it's much more difficult. So let me give you some key tips for solving word problems. Okay. First of all, because they're word problems, the first thing you want to do is clarify the words. Quite often a word problem will include one or two words or more that you may have heard of before, but whose meaning may not be exactly clear to you. So you may want to even go so far as to look them up in a dictionary. Now, sometimes these words are familiar to you in the context of general everyday English, but in the context, in the technical context in which they're used, they may have a specific meaning, and you want to be clear on that as well. Now, not only that, but you want to clarify the wording in the information, or you may end up using wrong data. It's my experience that quite often students read one sentence and they misinterpret what the information it provides is, and so they use the information in the wrong way. So spend some time reading the information, understanding the wording, maybe explaining to someone else, explaining to yourself, ensuring, in other words, that you really understand what the problem is all about. And also, speaking of wording, you want to clarify the wording of the questions. Okay? And again, it is my experience that quite often students end up doing a very good job at solving a problem. Except they didn't quite solve the problem that had been asked, but they solved a different problem, maybe a related problem, something that is close but not close enough. So what you want to do is you want to read carefully the question and make sure you're answering that given question and not something else. But this is just the preliminary stage. After this, what you want to do is you want to identify which quantities are involved in this problem. After all, these are going to be mathematical problems, so we're going to have to handle quantities and relate them in equations and inequalities and taking derivatives and all these kind of things. So we have to be very, very clear on which quantities we're talking about, how they're related, and making sure that we're relating them in the proper way. But we cannot relate them properly if we don't know what they are. So make sure that you identify the actual quantities that you're using. I mentioned a second ago about the fact that we're going to have to set up a relationship. So what you want to do is you want to set up those relationships by selecting the appropriate one. You may want to look them up. Maybe some of the relationships that you need, you've forgotten them. I'm sure you all remember the Pythagorean theorem, okay? But I know again from experience you may have forgotten about things like similar triangles, or about things like what's the sum of all the angles inside a polygon, or maybe the area of a trapezoid, or any one of these relationship formulae. So you may want to look them up and confirm them. Make sure that you are using the correct relationships. And then, of course, when you're doing this, you're going to be representing the quantities and the relationship through variables, through equations, through symbols, and so on. Well, use symbols that remind you of which quantities you're using. So, for instance, if you're using time, don't use X. Okay? Use T that will remind you of time. If you're using dollars, don't use Y. Use S for the symbol of the dollar sign, or maybe M for money, or D for dollars, whatever it is, or C if it's a cost, or R if it's a revenue, or D if it's a distance, whatever it is, but use symbols that actually will remind you of what those quantities mean. Otherwise, in 2 or 3 steps, you're going to set up a beautiful equation with X's and Y's and Z, and you have no idea which one is which and what they mean. And so if you end up making a mistake, you won't even notice it. Now, the next thing that you want to do is you want to, as you look at your work, as your work develops, what is that arrow doing there? Go away, cursor. Okay, thank you. Oh, go away. Thank you. All right. So ask continually, is what you're doing making sense? So in other words, are the relationships you're finding, the steps that you're going through, all the equations you're setting up and so on, are they making sense? Are the answers, the partial answers that you're getting, making sense? Quite often, in order to completely solve a problem, you first have to go through some intermediate steps. And at those intermediate steps, you're going to find out certain values of certain variables which are useful, but they're not the final answer. And so what you want to do is say, well, does that value make sense? Otherwise, if at some point you end up with values that don't make sense and you don't even notice it, well, you're going to be wasting your time. Okay. Also, at the end of the problem, make sure that you have actually completed the problem. Remember I said earlier, one of the things you want to do is you want to check the wording of the questions. Make sure that you have answered all the questions that have been asked and those questions that have been asked, not questions that you made up on your own or not only partial questions. Again, it is my experience that sometimes students do quite a good work up to a certain point and then they think they're done, and so they stop and go on to the next question during a test, say, and they don't realize that they are not finished and that they need to compute something else. And so that's a needless loss of marks. Besides, it's not a good professional thing to do, right? You want to make sure that you have completed your job before moving on to something else. Right, so these are general tips that you can use for any word problem. We're going to see some different kinds of word problems later, like optimization problems, and some more in the winter. So keep all of these ones in mind as you work on any one of these word problems. But I have one final tip for you. Okay, actually 3 tips. If you want to become good at problem solving, there are 2 things that you have to do. Actually, the first let me rewind that. There are 4 things you have to do. The first 3 are practice, 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 because you want to remember that you're never going to be the perfect problem solver. Okay, so you're always going to learn new methods, new ideas, new procedures, new avenues for solving word problems, new aspects of a word problem that you may not have noticed before. But practicing by itself, actually, it turns out, is not enough. You may practice a lot and still not improving your problem solving. Why? You need one more thing. What you need is you need to reflect on the experience you acquire. Once you practice on a problem, stop before you go on to the next problem. Stop and ask yourself, what did I do to solve this problem? What worked? What gave me troubles? What did I end up trying that didn't actually work? Why didn't it work? Now, this might look like additional work, and you say, oh, gee, I already have a lot of homework to do. Why do I have to go through this stage of reflecting and thinking and all these kind of things? Well, quite simply because otherwise you're not going to learn how to do word problems. So if you just practice like someone who just keeps hammering nails and so on and never learned how to do it properly. Okay, so if you keep doing it, you'll keep hammering your fingers repeatedly. But if every time you hammer your finger you say, whoa, what did I do wrong here? What should I have done? Was it my hammer hand that went wrong? Was my hand holding the nail that was not properly placed, or what was it? So you need to certainly reflect on your experience and learn from it. Related to that, there is something else that I want to point out. There is no strategy for solving word problems that works for everyone. Okay? So you'll have to develop your own strategy. In class, we'll see several of these strategies. I'm sure you have seen some in high school already. Try them out. See what works, see what doesn't. What steps can you do without? Which steps are really important for you to do, otherwise you're going to be in troubles. So always develop your abilities, your skill, your own procedure. Make it your own. Become your own problem solver.